The chalk snapped in half the moment Kranich pressed it against the board, and the sound made my second pair of eyes twitch before I even understood why. I did not know yet that in 3 seconds, everything my species believed about humans would fall apart in front of 40 students. My name does not matter here. What matters is what I saw and what I felt, because feeling is something we were taught not to trust when it came to Earth creatures. We were taught to study them, measure them, write reports about them. We were never taught to fear them. Fear was for old stories, for grandparents, who still believed Earth was a graveyard planet that somehow grew people instead of just burying them. I was sitting in the 3rd row of combat theory, a class most of us took because it sounded exciting, and turned out to be mostly slides and diagrams. Our professor, a tall Velkari named Doss with silver skin and a voice like dry leaves, liked to remind us that theory was not the same as truth. He said humans were the most theorized species in the galaxy and the least understood, and every semester somebody had to be the one to try understanding them the wrong way. That somebody, this semester, was Kranich. Kranich was built like a wall that had decided to grow arms. His homeworld had heavier gravity than most, and it showed in the way he moved, slow and certain, like nothing in the room could push him off balance. He was popular, loud, and confident in a way that made teachers overlook how often he was wrong. He liked being watched. He liked being right even more, and when he could not be right, he liked being the loudest voice in the room until everyone forgot the question. At the back of the class sat a human girl named Alina. She never spoke unless asked. She never raised her hand first. She took notes in small, neat handwriting and sometimes smiled at nothing in particular, the kind of smile that did not ask to be noticed. Most of us had stopped noticing her weeks ago. She blended into the room like furniture, and on a planet full of loud, bright, competitive species, being quiet was almost the same as being invisible. I noticed her anyway, not because of anything she did, but because of something she did not do. She never flinched, not when Doss showed footage of Velkari duels, not when a Rethnu student described his homeworld's hunting rituals in detail that made 2 people leave the room. She watched everything with the same calm, steady attention, like she was reading a book she had already finished once before. That day, Doss stood at the front of the room and tapped the board. "Today we discuss primitive combat forms," he said, "specifically, early human stances, historical, not current. I want a volunteer to demonstrate what the old texts describe as a basic guard position." Nobody moved at first. Volunteering in combat theory usually meant standing in front of the class while everyone judged your footwork, and most of us preferred judging quietly from our seats. Then Kranich stood. He always stood. He walked to the front with the kind of stride that expected applause, picked up a piece of chalk, and turned to face us instead of the board. "I will save time," he said. "I already know what this looks like." He turned around and drew on the board. It was a stick figure, a circle for a head, 1 line for a body, 4 lines for arms and legs, and a tiny zigzag in one hand that I assumed was meant to be a stick or a weapon of some kind. He stepped back and looked at it with obvious pride, the way an artist looks at a masterpiece that took him 4 seconds to make. "This," Kranich said, "is a human warrior. This is what an entire species built its reputation on. A stick and a scream." A few students laughed, not everyone. I did not laugh, because I was watching the back of the room, where Alina still sat with her hands folded on her desk. Kranich was not finished. "I have read the reports," he said, raising his voice slightly, the way people do when they want a comment to travel further than the person it is aimed at. "Deathworlder, that is the word everyone uses like it means something. But look at this." He tapped the stick figure. "This is not a warrior. This is a joke that the galaxy has been too polite to say out loud." He looked directly at Alina when he said it. The room went quiet, in that specific way rooms go quiet, when everyone is waiting to see if someone will react, and secretly hoping they will, because reactions are more interesting than lectures. Alina did not look angry. She did not look embarrassed either. She looked at the stick figure on the board, tilted her head slightly, and smiled. It was such a small thing, a short curve at the corner of her mouth, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. But something about it made the back of my neck feel cold, and I did not understand why a smile could do that. Smiles were supposed to mean something was funny, or something was kind. This smile felt like neither. It felt like recognition. Like she had seen this exact moment before, in a different room, with a different person standing where Kranich stood now. "Something funny?" Kranich asked her. "A little," Alina said. Her voice was calm, almost soft, the kind of voice you would expect from someone commenting on the weather. "You got the stick right. Most people forget the stick." A few students laughed again, but this time the laughter had a different shape to it, uncertain, like they were not sure who the joke was actually aimed at. Kranich's jaw tightened. He was not used to being the one people laughed at. "Then maybe you can show us the correct version," he said, "since you seem to know so much." Doss, standing off to the side, opened his mouth like he might stop this before it went further, but something in Alina's posture made him pause. Later I would wonder if he already knew what was coming. Velkari professors were old, and old Velkari had heard the real stories, not just the diagrams. Alina stood up. She did not rush. She pushed her chair back with one hand, stepped out from behind her desk, and walked to the front of the room the same way she walked everywhere, unhurried, quiet, almost bored. 40 pairs of eyes followed her, some curious, some amused, a few, like mine, uneasy without knowing exactly why. She stopped a short distance from Kranich. He was easily twice her size. His shoulders alone looked wider than her whole upper body. Standing next to him, she looked small, in a way that should have made the outcome of whatever was about to happen obvious to everyone in the room. "You want a demonstration," Alina said. It was not a question. "I want you to prove your species deserves its reputation," Kranich said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, the kind of smile that already believes it has won. "Show me something other than a stick figure." "Okay," Alina said. And then it happened. I have replayed those next few seconds in my memory more times than I can count, and even now they feel too fast to properly describe, like trying to describe lightning by watching the space where it used to be. Kranich moved first. He always moved first, because he never expected anyone to move faster. His hand came forward, not to strike, just to grab, the kind of move meant to prove a point without actually hurting anyone, the kind of move a much bigger person makes when they are certain size alone will settle things. Alina was not where his hand expected her to be. She had shifted her weight a half second before he moved, so small a motion that I only understood it afterward, replaying the memory slower than my mind wanted to. His hand closed on air where her shoulder had been. In the same instant, her own hand came up, not fast in the way you imagine speed, not flashy, but exact, catching his wrist at precisely the angle that turned his own forward motion against him. That was 1 second. Kranich's balance broke before he understood it was breaking. His weight, all of it, momentum built by his own attack, kept moving forward while his wrist stopped moving with him. I watched his eyes widen, not with pain, but with confusion, the specific confusion of someone whose body is doing something his mind has not agreed to yet. That was 2 seconds. Alina stepped into the space he had just vacated, not away from him, not around him, straight into where his center of balance used to be, and used his own falling weight to guide him down. There was no scream. There was no dramatic collapse. There was just a controlled, almost gentle motion, like she was helping someone sit down rather than putting them on the floor. Kranich's back met the ground with a solid, contained sound, and her hand rested lightly at his collar, not pressing, just present, just there, a reminder rather than a threat. That was 3 seconds. The room did not make a sound. I do not think anyone breathed. I certainly did not, though breathing was optional for my species in short bursts, so perhaps I simply forgot the option existed. Kranich lay on the floor, blinking up at the ceiling, his expression somewhere between shock and disbelief, as if his own body had betrayed him without warning. Alina straightened up. She stepped back, giving him room, and offered her hand. "You okay?" she asked, and her voice held no mockery in it at all. It was the same calm voice she had used to comment on the stick figure. Not cold, not proud, just steady. Kranich stared at her hand for a long moment before he took it. She helped him up with an ease that made the size difference between them feel almost irrelevant, and he stood there, rubbing his wrist, saying nothing, which for Kranich was its own kind of statement. Doss cleared his throat, though it took him 2 tries. That, he said, was a joint lock, transitioning into a controlled takedown, using the opponent's own forward momentum. Efficient, minimal force, no unnecessary damage. He said it the way professors say things when they are trying very hard to sound like they expected exactly this outcome all along. Alina walked back to her seat. She did not look proud. She did not look satisfied. She looked, if anything, a little tired, like this was a routine she had performed too many times to find interesting anymore. She sat down, folded her hands on her desk again, and looked at the board, at the stick figure still standing there, untouched by everything that had just happened around it. I found myself staring at that stick figure too, and for the first time, it did not look like a joke to me anymore. It looked like a warning nobody had bothered to read carefully. Class continued. Doss moved on to the next slide, something about defensive formations used by another species entirely, but I do not think anyone in that room was actually listening. I certainly was not. My mind kept replaying those 3 seconds, over and over, trying to understand what I had actually witnessed. It was not the speed that unsettled me the most, though the speed was unsettling. It was the calm. Kranich had reacted like every predator I had ever studied, fast, aggressive, certain that force would solve the problem in front of him. Alina had reacted like someone who already understood exactly how the sequence would end before it began. There had been no hesitation in her, no uncertainty, no moment where she needed to decide what to do next. Her body had simply known. I thought about the reports we studied in this very class. Deathworlder. A word thrown around so often it had lost its weight, the way any word does when you hear it enough times without ever seeing what it actually describes. We had read that Earth's gravity was higher than average for a life-supporting world. We had read that its predators were faster, stronger, and more numerous than most ecosystems allowed. We had read that human children were taught to run before most species' children learned to walk, simply because the alternative on Earth was rarely survival. We had read all of it, and none of it had meant anything, because reading about danger and standing 3 feet away from someone who has lived inside it are 2 very different experiences. Kranich sat down heavily, a few seats away from me, still rubbing his wrist, his usual loudness nowhere to be found. Nobody teased him, nobody laughed. The room had shifted into something quieter, more careful, like everyone had silently agreed to reconsider things they had been sure of an hour earlier. Near the end of class, Doss brought the stick figure back up, almost as if he could not resist. "Some of you," he said, glancing briefly toward the back row, though he did not say her name, "drew this as a joke. I want you to understand something. Early human weapons were simple, because human beings themselves were the weapon. The stick was never the point. The mind holding it was." He let that sit in the room for a moment before continuing. Most predators on Earth were faster than humans. Most were stronger. Many could see better in the dark, smell better, strike harder. Humans survived anyway, not because they matched those advantages, but because they learned to end confrontations quickly, efficiently, and without wasting the strength they did not have to spare. 3 seconds was not luck today. 3 seconds was practice, layered over generations, until it stopped looking like effort at all. I looked at Alina again. She was writing something in her notebook, small, neat handwriting, as if none of this concerned her personally, as if her professor was describing a species she had only read about herself. When class finally ended, students filed out slowly, quietly, several of them glancing at her as they passed, though none of them said anything. I lingered near my seat, packing my things slower than necessary, until the room had mostly emptied. Alina noticed me watching. She did not seem bothered by it. "You have a question," she said, not unkindly. "I do," I admitted. "Were you always going to do that, even before he drew the picture?" She thought about it for a moment, tapping her pen lightly against her notebook. "I didn't want to," she said. "I don't usually. It causes a scene, and people ask a lot of questions afterward." She glanced at me, a small, knowing look, like now. "Then why?" "Because some people only understand a lesson if they feel it," she said. Words don't always land. He wasn't going to believe anything I told him. He needed something faster than an argument. I thought about Kranich lying on the floor, blinking up at the ceiling, and something about her answer settled into place. "You weren't angry," I said. "The whole time. I watched. You never looked angry." "I wasn't," she said simply. "Anger makes people slow. Anger makes them careless. Where I'm from, careless doesn't usually get a second chance." That sentence stayed with me long after I left the classroom, long after the corridor lights and the noise of other students returned to normal around me. It stayed with me because of how easily she said it, the same way someone might mention the weather or a minor inconvenience from earlier in the day. For her, it was simply true. It was not dramatic. It was not something to be impressed by. It was just how things were, back on the world she came from, a world most of us had only ever seen described in old survival footage narrated by voices that always sounded slightly too excited for their own good. I did not see Kranich draw another stick figure after that day. I did not see him raise his voice toward the back row again either. Whatever confidence he carried into that classroom had not disappeared entirely, but it had changed shape, become quieter, more careful, the way confidence often does after it meets something it did not expect. As for Alina, she remained exactly the same, quiet, unassuming, taking small, neat notes, smiling faintly at nothing in particular, blending into the room like she had never left her seat at all. But I noticed her differently now. I think we all did. Because somewhere behind that calm, ordinary posture was a stillness that had nothing to do with boredom and everything to do with readiness, the kind of readiness that does not need to announce itself, does not need to threaten, does not need 3 extra seconds it does not require. I used to think the phrase, Deathworlder, was an exaggeration, a title earned through survival statistics, rather than anything a person could actually witness with their own eyes. I do not think that anymore. I think, somewhere on a distant, gravity-heavy planet full of creatures faster and stronger than the ones who lived there, humanity learned exactly how much force was necessary, and exactly how much was wasted effort. I think they learned to smile calmly in the face of mockery, not because they found it funny, but because they already knew how the next few seconds would unfold. And I think, if I ever find myself standing across from a human again, wondering whether their reputation is truth or myth, I will remember a stick figure on a classroom board, a quiet girl rising from her seat without hurry, and 3 seconds that rewrote everything I thought I understood about the softest-looking species in the galaxy. I will not need a 4th second to learn that lesson twice.